with one of leading non-profit organizations in Europe, PEPPOL. And of course, we have excellent pool of experts from different international organizations, such as ICC, UNESCAP, and also from private sector representatives who are going to support us in exploring the different aspects of the e-invoicing and e-procurement and how we can enhance overall cross-border trade. On this short note, I would like to open the webinar and start with the opening remarks. And first, I would like to introduce Mr. Andre Hodevik, Secretary General, Open PEPPOL, ISPL, and Special Advisor, Division for Public Procurement, the Norwegian Agency for Public and Financial Management. And after, we will follow with the intervention remarks from Mr. Jan Duval, Chief Trade Policy and Facilitation Section, ESCAP, Mr. Andrew Wilson, Permanent Observer of the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, to the United Nations, and Global Policy Director. And last but not least, with Mr. Kijin Kim, always with us, thank you for that, Senior Economist in the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of Asian Development Bank. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hodevik for his intervention remarks. Please, Mr. Hodevik.
Thank you, Armin. Dear all, my name is Andre Hodevik, and I'm the Secretary General of Open PEPPOL. First of all, I would like to thank you very much to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific for facilitating this webinar together with the other organizers. And together with the esteemed speakers from the Korea Trade Network and the International Chambers of Commerce and the UNESCAP, I hope we from Open PEPPOL's side will contribute to increased knowledge of e-invoicing and cross-border paperless trade through this webinar. As was mentioned, Open PEPPOL originates from Europe, but since 2018, we have had a growing international outreach. In Asia and the Pacific, Singapore was the first country to adopt PEPPOL, followed by New Zealand, Australia, and the latest Japan. Please visit our webpage, peppol.org, for further information, and please make use of the Q&A session later today if you want to learn more. Today, I look forward to a productive webinar where delegates should gain new insights and knowledge about e-invoicing and the benefits that PEPPOL brings. Thank you so far.
Thank you, Mr. Hodevik. Now we will start with our pre-recorded intervention remarks. Thank you.
So on behalf of UNESCAP, a very warm welcome to all participants and panelists for the 12th webinar in our joint series with ICC and ADB on accelerating cross-border paperless trade. The series has now reached well over 2,000 participants since it was launched, and you are welcome to access recordings of all previous webinars from our website. Today's webinar focuses on e-invoicing for cross-border paperless trade. Invoices are one of the most important documents for trade, providing a basis for payment and business management, but also for trade control and regulatory compliance. As such, it is very much essential that electronic invoices be recognized and trusted by both private sector and government agencies. And in the case of international trade, that trust needs to extend across borders. So how can this be achieved? Well, this session, organized in collaboration with Pan-European Public Procurement Online, PEPPOL, will take a look at what solutions and international standards have emerged in this area and how they may be used to move forward to fully electronic invoicing and procurement in international supply chains. So we're very lucky to have a wonderful list of experts with us to discuss this, including from Korea Trade Network and UNESCAP. So I look forward to learn from the experts we have with us today, and I wish the seminar most success. Thank you very much.
The International Chamber of Commerce mobilizes a global network of more than 45 million businesses in over 170 countries worldwide. Our aim is to make it easier for businesses to trade internationally by setting rules and standards for cross-border commerce, resolving and avoiding commercial disputes, and facilitating access to markets for businesses of all shapes and sizes. A coordinated and interoperability-focused approach to electronic invoicing is key to fostering global trade in the 21st century. E-invoices may not get that much attention in the broader international trade debate, but from our perspective, they're only growing in importance for the digital economy, especially from the perspective of small and medium-sized enterprises. Discussions on e-invoicing at WTO level took place last week in Geneva, and this shows the great importance of these instruments for the future of the global trading system. Indeed, more governments and firms around the world are embracing electronic invoicing to support traditional and digital trade and to improve tax, business, and trade services. However, as more countries create their own electronic invoicing frameworks, there's a risk that they will enact country-specific technical standards that ultimately act as a barrier to digital trade. The potential of electronic invoicing in facilitating cross-border commerce will not be unlocked if the implementation of e-invoicing persists with the current level of diversity of approach among jurisdictions and law enforcement. A consistent legal, administrative, and technological global framework is needed, and the adoption of e-invoicing should be embedded into the broader digitalization strategies of public administrations and indeed businesses alike. ICC, as many of you will be aware, has been a pioneer in initiating the debate on electronic invoices and continuous transaction controls. In the recent past, we have advocated for international coordination on e-invoicing frameworks, and a set of CTC principles has been launched in 2020. These were produced by an ad hoc working group, and their persistent relevance will be discussed later on during this webinar. We will continue our engagement in this critical area of developments, and we welcome very much the opportunity to be here today to discuss this crucial topic for international trade with other vital stakeholders. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this webinar on e-invoicing for cross-border trade. Digitalization has been receiving a lot of attention these days across various fora. For example, e-invoicing delivers increased efficiency, accuracy, and reliability in cross-border transactions. However, connecting isolated digital systems has been a key constraint in the progress of digitalization. It is encouraging that the Pan-European Public Procurement Online, or PEPPOL, as a key framework that enables interoperability is now being used in many countries. In Asia and the Pacific region, various trade agreements are being currently expanded to cover trade in services, investment, and digitalization. For example, the Singapore-United Kingdom Digital Economy Agreement, which entered into force June this year, covers mutual data exchange and cooperation in emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, digital identities, and legal technology. It also recognized the importance of implementing measures for e-invoicing and cross-border interoperability using international frameworks such as PEPPOL. ADB continues to support implementation of digital trade reforms and harmonized standards. We are very eager to learn more about this system, how it has benefited various stakeholders, what best practices can be applied to the Asia-Pacific region, and its prospects for upscaling globally. Thank you very much, and good day.
Thank you. Thank you for our speakers for the opening remarks. Now I would like to move with our next session. And I would like to thank you, all the speakers, for the opening remarks and invite Mr. Yang Bat, UNESCAP Vice Chair, who have an extensive knowledge and experience in many cross-border related standards developed within the UNESCAP organization. Without further ado, Jan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amin. Okay, just while that's coming up, we have 4 panelists today. There's 7 minutes each. I'll give you a bit of a warning toward the end of that. Obviously, the focus here is around invoice procurement, and that's our focus on this particular session of this webinar series. But we also want to talk a little about how important the invoice is that is in actually launching the logistics supply chain as well, and the physical identification of goods to what's moving through. I'm just hoping that presentation deck will come up any minute now. My involvement in all of this started in '99 when there was a forum, a UN forum in Australia, which was the launch of OASIS. So I've been the whole journey right through this whole space. What we want to do is I've been asked to moderate this session here, and we are absolutely focused on the invoice and procurement at the government level, with the vision that once we've got that happening, it will move down to the private sector, and the private sector will start to become more active in its digitalization of trade. Now, that private sector, of course, takes that invoice and moves that. This is the one. Okay, we're very well. Thank you very much. So you can see there the role I hold at CFACT as a vice chair of the Sustainable International Supply Chain, the by pay side, procurement, agriculture, and tourism. And I'm actually one of the 5 founders of what we now know as UN Next. Next slide, please. Okay, we're all talking about linking data through supply chains. And quite often we're inclined to deal with one sectorial view rather than look at a holistic view across the whole lot, where the goods, where the information is to be shared between transport, regulatory, and the buy-sell side of things. And we'll highlight the fact that there's a set of invoices, invoice between the buyer and seller of the goods, which precipitates a series of invoices and orders for the purchasing of the services and logistics assets use that will drive the trade forward. So we're looking about this holistic view. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a slide that comes from CFACT it comes back from about 2003, 4, 5 maybe. You can see here we're talking about the pay side, the invoice, but there's a lot of things happen before that invoice turns up. And that invoice really is one piece of action inside an awful lot of action around commercial procedures, transportation, regulatory, and financial procedures. Now, it is this invoice that requires such clear master data before we can even place the order, so that what's on the invoice is clean and accurate data about what's going to move forward, properly described in terms of Incoterms, taxation, all those sorts of things that are needed in the supply chain. And that information starts to drive what we have to manage through the logistics. And it's while we're doing this logistics that we're able to now introduce with modern technologies, IoT, and knowing whether we're looking after precious goods where temperature and humidity are important, knowing where goods have been in terms of geospatial and all that sort of stuff. So all of this is predicated from that invoice that is put in place, either where you're the last person bringing goods into a country to supply them to government, or you're invoicing government to pay for the goods that they've just received. Next slide, please. Now, this is a rather busy slide. It comes from one of the recent business requirement specifications of UNCFAC, but it shows the concept of a data pipeline. What happened? Okay, it shows that. And there's a lot of data sources and there's a lot of users of information. So on the top left, we see we've got IoT, we've got regulatory agency, we've got declarants, we've got transport information, we've got the buyer and seller of the actual goods and services. And then we move through all of these activities that are going on. These presentations will be available to you at the end of this forum. And then we've got the users of that information and who's happening through to the signee and so forth. So a pretty busy situation driven from that original order and invoice. Next slide, please. Now, if we think of ourselves over here on the right-hand side of this diagram as being the buyer, then now I'm going to suggest to you today as my moderating role is to begin with the end in mind. Our job today is to focus on the government payment for goods and services using e-invoice, not paper, recognizing that the invoice is also a key message launching the logistics end-to-end trade that I just spoke about, understanding the importance of clean master data prior to the placement of the order, and knowing that the physical IDs of the locations, product, logistics, assets, entities will support IoT and track and trace. And we know we're moving into distributed identity, verifiable credentials, all of this stuff required to at least achieve these sustainable development goals. So we're talking here, I believe, in this webinar about this, not the syntax, but the governance of the semantics and the processes that will do this. So given we have the technologies and standards, what will it take to energize national uptake of government purchases of goods and services by invoicing? What is the change management required to achieve this? This includes things like legislations and various other laws within a country. And what will be the governments required to sustain the value and lead to ultimately to the private sector adoption? Now, we know that we just heard that Australia, New Zealand, Japan now, Singapore, and a lot in Europe has already occurred. So there's some good case studies for us to be able to work with as we progress during this webinar. Next slide, please. I think that's the last one. That's it. So if you want to get in touch, there's the things. So what I'll do now is I'm going to open up the session to bring in the panelists. I'm going to ask Sean Hung Ha, who is the Director of International Business and Cooperation Korea Trade Network, KNET. His career has worked through many projects across Asia, Pacific, Africa, and South America. He's currently the director of KNET, and he is leading paperless trade services and implementation in single window and other e-government system projects to bring forward that experience to Korea. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Yan Wat. Thank you for your kind introduction. Most of all, I'm very glad to join this webinar. As the planner who designed the paperless trade services for Korean trade community, e-invoicing, especially the cross-border invoice, was one of the yes. So one of the key documents that I have always wanted to achieve the full functioning e-invoice. I'd like to give some background information about the Korea's the e-invoicing, as well as some of the challenges that my company, Korea Trade Network, is facing in providing the cross-border e-invoice services. In Korea, in year 2010, the tax authority has introduced the e-invoicing system. Actually, the exact title of the system is e-tax invoice system. So all the business who are entering into business with other businesses, B2B transactions, are obliged to issue the e-tax invoice in their business transactions, except several cases like the case of the business with the tax exemption, or the micro small businesses, or in the case of the export. So I would say that over 10 years now, the Korean businesses are quite familiar with the e-tax invoice, and in the most domestic business transactions, we don't use any paper invoice anymore. So I would say that the Korea is quite advanced when it comes to the introduction of the e-invoice. However, when it comes to the case of the cross-border invoicing, it's a totally different story. In year 2002 and 2003, the Korean government and the Japanese government has agreed to initiate some cross-border paper trade services for the trading companies in both countries. So we have identified like the big major trading companies like Hyundai Motor, Hyundai Heavy Industry, and in Japan side like Mitsubishi Trading and Sumitomo Trading. Those big enterprises in two countries, they joined this initiative, and they established the supply chain network through the system between Korean paperless trade service provider, KTNet, and Japan's service provider, the name was Teddy. So in their business between these Japanese big and Korean big enterprises, they issued the purchase order and invoice, packing list, and bill of lading devices, and many other data need to operate the supply chain between these companies. And in the beginning, these trading companies were very happy to exchange this trading information and document in electronic form. However, years later, there was a challenge that when it comes to this kind of the private sector transactions, the government, especially the customs, was not recognizing these electronic transactions same as the paper document transactions. So the problem was that even though these trading companies are exchanging invoice and packing list and other documents in electronic messages with a digital signature on it, still they have to exchange the paper document. We've been trying to work with the customs to address this issue, how we can recognize the electric invoice and other trading document from other countries in Korean government system. However, so far, still there are some challenges. There are big challenges because in Korean government, the law, the Electronic Transaction Act, actually allows that any document issued in electronic form with the enough security measures to identify who's the issuer, who are the owner of the document, can be regarded as the same as like a paper document in legal manner. However, the problem is that
Ram, I'm going to ask you to have to wind up soon, please.
Yes. I'm just issuing the final thing. The problem is that when it comes to the electronic document digitally signed by the foreign entity, the Korean law is not allowing to how it can be recognized in Korea. So we need to address the issue of not only the technical coordination for the exchange of the invoice, but also it is important to harmonize the legal background so that the domestic law can be coordinated to recognize the foreign electronic document and signatures. Thank you.
Thank you, Raman. You've brought something up. It's going to be quite an interesting discussion in the Q&A. We're all noticing this one. Okay, Andre is next. He was introduced by Aman before. So Andre, I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I will be sharing my screen so that we can get started immediately. Yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about PEPPOL and Open PEPPOL. And these are two terms. PEPPOL is what we do. And our approach is to integrate business processes by standardizing the way information is structured and exchanged. And we also use PEPPOL as a name of the network, the PEPPOL network, and the business interoperability specifications, the PEPPOL BIS that we provide. And all of this is part of a PEPPOL interoperability framework, which also includes the legal agreements, governance, and compliance measures. We are the organization Open PEPPOL was established in 2012. And this was as a follow-up of the PEPPOL project. And as was mentioned earlier, PEPPOL originally was a pan-European public procurement online. But since 2018, we are just referring to PEPPOL as a name in its own. So it's no longer an abbreviation for anything. Open-PEPPOL is a not-for-profit, democratic, member-led international association, and we have members coming from the public and private sectors, with membership continuously increasing as we have new members joining from all around the world. If you are to look at the three pillars of PEPPOL, these can be described as the PEPPOL business interoperability specifications, which is the business process choreography, information content, and technical specifications for business documents exchanged between the service providers. These can technically be implemented with use of ISO/IEC UBL or UNESCAP cross-industry invoice when it comes to then invoicing. The PEPPOL network is the specifications and services for discovery of the recipient's capabilities, the dynamic addressing between service providers, and secure delivery of business documents between service providers. So the PEPPOL network.
Andre, can I just interrupt? We don't see your slides, or at least I don't see your slides.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to push the share button. Thank you very much, Steve. Now you see my screen, and this was the slide I was talking to first, and this is the second one. So a long time since I was on Zoom, obviously. Thank you very much for the reminder. So the PEPPOL network enables PEPPOL certified service providers to send and receive PEPPOL BIS and other document types that are registered in the network on behalf of their end user customers. There's also a set of PEPPOL governance arrangements, which includes agreements, policies, and procedures between the PEPPOL stakeholders, defining the rules in which PEPPOL activity is undertaken. We have three main stakeholder groups. First one is end users. These are the buyers and the sellers that send and receive business documents through the PEPPOL network. These are not required to be members of Open PEPPOL to send and receive messages. And service providers, that they are the ones that enable the business process interoperability between the end users, and they provide PEPPOL access points and or the addressing and capability lookup services, and it's mandatory for these to be a member of Open PEPPOL. Then the third category is the PEPPOL authorities, or the policy enablers that drive the adoption of PEPPOL within a jurisdiction. Currently, all our government departments, ministries, or agencies, but this can also, at least in theory, be policy enablers coming from a private sector or a non-government perspective. So some key statistics: we currently have 18 countries with PEPPOL authorities, 42 countries with Open PEPPOL members, and now in November we just reached number 500 coming from Malaysia. And we have some 723,000 registered recipients in the PEPPOL network. The number of senders is somewhat higher, but we only focus on registering the recipients and their capability to receive a different type of business documents. So this is just a world map of that goes into the same, and here we can show the distribution of where we have PEPPOL authorities and where we have countries with certified access point or service providers, and where we have members. And countries where we have members, I mentioned Malaysia as the most recent, but also India. That means that there are service providers that are in the process of certifying their access points so that they can be connected and start exchanging business documents through the PEPPOL network. When we look at the increasing global adoption of PEPPOL, we saw that the Japanese digital agency, they joined as a new PEPPOL authority in October 2021. And now 1 year later, they announced the availability of their PEPPOL invoice specifications for use by accredited service providers. We have also seen a new PEPPOL authority established in Finland this year, and we have seen 3 service providers from India joining Open PEPPOL now in this year. We are hopeful that Malaysia will become a PEPPOL authority in the near future as well. So that was my introduction, and you will learn more about the interoperability framework and the 4-corner model from my colleagues later in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I'd like to now introduce Miss Luisa Scarsella, and I'm going to take a moment here with this introduction. One of my missions in this work is succession planning. And I really like to go through Luisa's introduction. Luisa is a global policy lead, taxation and trade at the International Chamber of Commerce. She is also a research associate at the Digitax Center for the University of Antwerp in Belgium, where she has worked as a postdoctorate researcher from January 2021 to June 22. Previously, Lisa has worked as a research associate for the International Fiscal Association and as a research teaching assistant at the Department of Tax and Fiscal Law at the University of Austria. Lisa has obtained her PhD in tax law with distinction in October 2022, last month, and won several prizes and scholarships, such as the Doctorate Tax Thesis Award for the European Association of Tax Law Professors and the Postdocument Fellowship by the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Lisa, welcome to this work. You can see some of us have been at it a time. Really welcoming fresh new minds to the work. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I actually got my PhD in 2020, so my celebrations were some years ago, but thank you very much. And I'll share my screen, so I have some slides. I first of all would like to thank Jan for moderating and also the organizer for organizing such a great event on such a topical development in the area of paperless cross-border trade. During the minutes at my disposal, I would like to highlight the opportunities and challenges from a business perspective of electronic invoicing, and also give you an overview of what ICC has done so far in this particular area. So I'd like to start my presentation with an analytic question. Are invoicing right now a barrier or a facilitator for cross-border trade? Indeed, we've seen that electronic invoices can improve tax, business, and trade services. We've seen governments and companies alike around the world embracing electronic invoicing for decades now. And as we look at why they are embracing electronic invoices, it's indeed because there are a set of potential benefits, such as shortened processing cycles, including payments of accounts receivable and tax recovery, while at the same time cutting transaction costs, such as printing and storage, but also improving tax data management and enforcement, real-time control, support the modernization of the economy, and make it easier for companies to operate on a global scale. And this is indeed valuable for both MNEs and SMEs alike. So when we look at the benefits, is it clear that they can really be a facilitator of cross-border trade? But it is still an analytic question, because if we look at the current status quo of what is the situation around the world, they can actually be also a barrier right now, because as more countries create their own electronic invoicing frameworks, there's a potential risk that they could enact country-specific technical standards. And such requirement differences can become a barrier to cross-border digital services and data flow, consequently making it harder and more expensive for companies to sell and support customers in multiple markets, especially for SMEs that don't have the capacity and the means to adapt to the different requirements around the world. Thus, there is the need to have a common coordinated set of rules and technical standards and processes to enable the interoperable interpretation of the invoice in digital form. And so we need to make the different requirements not have been a barrier, but actually have the full potential of electronic invoicing being a facilitator for cross-border trade. And this is where ICC came to play, as we were at the forefront of this discussion. In 2019, we established a continuous transaction control working group that is led by Christian van der Berg, who is going to speak in the second panel. And this working group has produced in 2020 a set of practice principles for implementation of continuous transaction control. This set of principles are now more relevant than ever, especially when we look at the VAT in the digital age proposal coming up in the European region, but also the fact that there are a lot of newcomers around the world of governments introducing electronic invoicing standards. So when we look at the CTC principles that were published by ICC in 2020, we can see how the principles take CTC as all transaction control taken at real or near real time. They focus on tax and invoicing, but can apply to all administrations using CTC and to other type of business document as well. And their goal is to promote consistency and harmonization with the ultimate objective to reduce the administrative burden on companies by aiming to share the data only once. So the principles really work as a guiding light to all policymakers around the world that are interested in introducing electronic invoicing, but are also thinking about updating the current framework. And this set of principles contains 7 different principles that have been identified by the CTC working group. I will focus in the next slides for reasons of time on the first 3 principles, but I would like to emphasize the extremely important role of also the other 4 principles, such as cooperation among countries that has already emerged in the previous presentations on this panel. Also, the fact that it's important for countries to give sufficient lead-in time to businesses when they introduce or change CTC framework. The fundamental issues around data protection, data privacy, data confidentiality, and the fact that CTC needs to uphold the non-discrimination principle as well. Now, Christian will show how these principles really emerge as in critical case studies. But from a more principle-based approach, I will just would like to show you how these principles then are embedded and developed. So one of the first principle was listed in my previous slide was balance. Indeed, it is fundamental to strike the right balance between tax collection and economic growth. Enable having economic benefits can be a key instrument. Consider an initial period of voluntary adoption based on clear business benefits would be very encouraging. And it would be very encouraging also to have substantial encouragement of automation for standard-based business processes, as well as having flexibility to accommodate existing processes, but also ensure proportionality to the tax benefits sought, avoiding unnecessary burdens on businesses. Efficiency is the second principle. It is indeed fundamental to assure the maximum benefits for the private and public sectors alike. Efficiency can be seen through the different sub-principles that I've listed in the slide, such as providing data only once principle. So in order to have efficiency when implementing CTC framework, it is indeed important to have CTCs that alleviate the administrative burden of providing the same data several times. It is important to have consistency across jurisdictions, requirements, and different CTC variants. Interoperability among jurisdictions from a business, legal, technical, and operational perspective. The colleagues that have preceded me in the presentation have already highlighted the fact that it is important to have interoperability not just from a technical and operational perspective, but also in terms of governance and legal perspective as well. Having harmonization in technical, legal, and process specification is also key. And the use of pre-existing standards where possible is also encouraging to be encouraged and advisable. And then finally, robustness and continuity is essential to avoid delays, problems, and ineffective communication. And communication is also what bridges the second principle to the third one. So it is indeed important to have the communication of unrealistic and long-term strategies that is embedded into a broader strategy of digitalization of the public administration. Electronic invoices are part of a broader strategy of digitalization, which is currently happening within public authorities around the world. It is fundamental to have an explicit strategies that is communicated to all stakeholders so that all stakeholders have a common understanding of the objective and the goals that we aim to fulfill through CTC and electronic invoices. This will ensure alignment and indeed provide greater economic benefits. So to conclude, we indeed need private sector and business and public authorities to work hand in hand in order to achieve the full potential of electronic invoices. And ICC has contributed to this debate by offering this set of principles, but also like by engaging and will keep engaging in the discourse on how to really make sure that electronic invoices represent a way forward in facilitating paperless cross-border trade. And with this, I'd like to conclude. Feel free to reach out when you want to like more about the CTC working group and these principles. And I'll pass it on to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louisa. I'd now like to introduce the fourth panelist in this session, Mr. Stephen Graham, Market Development Lead, Open PEPPOL. Stephen is a Marketing Development Lead. He's a director he's a director level experience in public and private sectors. Interestingly, he's authorized the National Health System e-procurement strategy for the UK Department of Health, which mandated the adoption of GS1, another major player in this space, and PEPPOL standards. He went on to create and lead the award-winning Scan for Safety healthcare program, improving patient safety, enabling clinical productivity, and driving supply chain efficiency. So, Christian, over to you. I think you pull a lot of this together. Thank you. Sorry. Stephen, over to you. Sorry.
Hi. Seem to be having a little bit of an issue with the technical side. Do you have my slides ready? I can't seem to load them from my machine. And also, I'm not sure with the with the image on my camera. Is it working okay?
We see your face in a white color.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yes. No, can you share the slides?
No, I can't seem to share them. I don't know whether somebody else can load them.
I'm asking my colleagues.
Hello, can you send the slide to us?
Otherwise, I can share from my screen, Steve, and you just
if you could
tell me when to click, and here you are.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay, so sorry about the technical issues. So yes, I wanted to explain how PEPPOL works really. So the four-corner model is a crucial concept in the world of PEPPOL, so it's helpful to understand this. And so in the diagram we have these four corners. In the little circles in the boxes you see C1, C2, C3, and C4. So in the diagram, C1 is the sender. And in this case, we've shown an invoice, although it can be any type of document. And C4 is the receiver, so the supplier at C1, buyer at C4, and they want to exchange an invoice. So the seller wants to send an invoice to the buyer. So that previously has been done in various means, none of which has really proved a sort of a convenient method for senders and receivers. So the PEPPOL four-corner model tries to resolve that issue, and what we have is a service providers where each sender and each receiver selects a service provider from the PEPPOL certified service provider list. There's more than 300 service providers certified by PEPPOL all around the world. And so it's just a free choice really of who they take. And the concept here is that you connect with one service provider, and that allows you to reach any other receiver that is connected to a PEPPOL service provider. So simply the invoice goes from the supplier to their service provider, who then translates it into the PEPPOL language, sends it to the service provider of the receiver, and then the service provider of the receiver sends it to the receiver. And the advantage here is that the supplier and the buyer are both operating in an environment that's not standardized. So they can use their own technology, their own systems. They don't need to particularly invest in any new systems. And the work is taken care of by the standardized area, which is where PEPPOL comes in. So we provide this standardized area where there's a network of service providers. And the way they work is that you need this sort of dynamic discovery, which we have here in the diagram as SML and SMP. And so you need to be able to look up the address of the organization that you want to send a message to. And you do that dynamically in the same way that the internet operates in real time. So there's a lookup capability, and that allows the service provider to find the SMP of the receiver. So the first thing is the SMP. The SML tells you the address, so to find the SMP, and then the SMP tells the service provider what the capabilities are. So they're registered. They will register their capabilities in the SMP, and that will say they're capable of receiving a PEPPOL invoice. So that all happens in a moment, and that then enables the service provider to send from corner 2 to corner 3 the message. And one of the rules in the way that the four-corner model works is that the service provider must validate the message before they send it. So you can only send a valid PEPPOL message into the network, which means that once it's received by corner 3, it can automatically be routed through to the buyer, and they will get the message that they have acknowledged that they're capable of receiving. So the PEPPOL business interoperability specifications provide all the information about how the message is created. So all the sort of syntax and semantics, all that kind of stuff, and provides the specifications for the network. So that's basically how the four-corner model works. So if we go to the next slide, there's some key features to recognise here, and that is that, as I mentioned, the senders and receivers, they utilise their existing systems. This probably originally PEPPOL started off in the business to government space, but it's now very much in both business to government and business to business. And the use in business to business environment is continuously increasing. So each sender and receiver connects to their choice of one of the certified providers in the network. Service providers convert the documents into the PEPPOL business interoperability specifications, pass them to the receiver. And the senders and receivers are free to use any of the PEPPOL certified service providers, and it means they're not locked in. So they can change service provider. And one of the challenges in previous setups would be that once you select a service provider, you're kind of tied in for a considerable amount of time, very difficult to change. And the PEPPOL network, in the way that it's just easily connected service providers, allows you to change very quickly, and also to start trading through the PEPPOL network. It's a very quick process. So getting the sort of onboarding process, as you might describe it, for somebody who wants to send a message is very quick. And part of the sort of principles are that the service providers, they charge their clients to send or receive documents. They don't charge each other. So service providers have no fees. Part of the rules of PEPPOL is there's no fees between the service providers. Okay, next slide. We've heard a little bit about continuous transaction controls, and I wanted to just show how PEPPOL accommodates that. But firstly, just to explain what we mean by CTC. So governments are increasingly seeing the opportunity of digitalization to increase their efficiency and to increase the collection of tax, so that they combat the very real issue of the loss of indirect tax, VAT or general sales tax or whatever it may be, which may be deliberate and may be accidental, but the size of the problem is, often it's 10% of the expected VAT that should be collected by the tax agencies isn't, because of losses either due to fraud or to maladministration. So CTC is a generic term to describe these control mechanisms, and it relies on collecting transactional invoice data in real or near real time, so that they can then know from a transactional basis what they expect to receive in terms of tax revenues. So PEPPOL has created a solution for this, and this slide shows this is built on the principles that ICC described in the previous presentation. So we have here the diagram of the existing four-corner model, and we simply extend that by creating a fifth corner. So the invoice would still go through its normal route. It means there's no additional burden on industry, on businesses. They can still continue to use the PEPPOL network for invoices and any other kind of document, but they simply send either a copy of the full document via the service provider, or a subset of that document that is extracted by the service provider, and that goes through to corner 5, which is the PEPPOL service provider that sits in front of the tax administration. So that allows the invoice to go through, a copy of the invoice or an extract of the invoice to go through to the tax administration. And also we have the service provider at corner 3 also sending the same information, and that allows the tax administration to close the loop. They know that the buyer has received the invoice, and they know then that they should expect to receive that amount of money. So in their tax administration data vault, they're able to collect all this data and analyze it, and if they want to, they can pre-fill tax returns and do all manner of clever stuff. But the key point is that they're able then to reconcile the amount of tax they're supposed to collect. So we click again, Andre. So the advantage here is combining tax reporting and invoice exchange in one simple mechanism. So it gives benefits for governments, it supports cross-border, and it enables the automation for the taxpayers, and again preserves this issue of not having any lock-in to any single system. Okay, so just quickly, next slide. So as well as invoices, I just want to recognize here that PEPPOL also does a lot more than invoices. So we have a number of document types on the left-hand side in production, both in the post-award and the pre-award space. In CTC, we have a number of documents in test. And then in development, we have documents being created for international invoice, which is now actually already an hour live in Japan. We have logistics, payment instruction, and some work being done in particular national jurisdictions, as an example, e-government. So just to recognise really that PEPPOL is not just about invoices, about much more, and it simply operates on this concept of a four-corner model that enables businesses to easily exchange documents with other businesses. So I think that's my slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you for the four panelists. I'll ask you to stay on the call because the Q&A is building up. It's my pleasure to introduce now my peer moderator for today, Ms. Florence Binta Diao, Policy Manager, Trade and Customs, International Chamber of Commerce. Florence has joined the Secretary of the International Chamber of Commerce in 2016 and is responsible for ICC's policy engagement on a range of trade issues, working with the ICC Customs and Trade Commission to develop distinctive policy positions and insights. She is driving corporate engagement on ICC's trade and customs work, as well as outreach with the World Customs Organization and the World Trade Organization. Having graduated from universities in Germany and France, Florence is a Master of International Security, holds a Master of International Security, as well as an MML in International Law. Over to you, Florence.
Thank you very much, and greetings from the ICC from Paris, and welcome to the second part of this webinar, in which we will hear a bit more about the practice and using the frameworks and the guidelines that we have heard in the first part of the webinar. So first, I would like to thank the co-organizers for bringing us all together today, and to you as well for taking the time to be with us. So about me, thank you for introducing me. So my name is Florence Binta Diao, and I work as a policy manager in the policy department together with Louisa, actually, at the ICC in Paris. And so now we're going to hear about some of the solutions that are provided in the context of e-invoicing. And so I'm delighted to start this part with Mr. Christian van der Walk as our first speaker. And he is Vice President, Strategy and Regulatory at Sovos. And as a background, Sovos Compliance actually acquired TrustWeaver in 2018. And TrustWeaver was co-founded by Christian in 2001. And it was a leading e-invoicing and e-archiving compliance vendor. And so I see also that Christian worked at the ICC HQ, and he has served on various boards for European and international businesses and also organizations. And he was elected Global Leader for Tomorrow by the WEF, the World Economic Forum, in 2000. So very relevant to today's webinar. He has also led ICC's working group that developed the guidelines that Luisa mentioned in her part on the CTCs. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, France. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. I will dive a little bit, let me see if I can share my slides here, dive a little bit more into the practical aspects of continuous transaction controls. I would like to just make sure if somebody could nod that they can see my screen. Yeah, excellent, thank you. So I won't make it too long, but yeah, the subject of continuous transaction controls is obviously becoming quite a big theme within any discussion about trade nowadays. And you know, electronic invoicing, although invoices are obviously not tax documents, tax administrations are addicted to them, and tax administrations have discovered technology big time now. You know, starting in Latin America already almost 20 years ago, the idea of receiving invoice data in a structured, standardized format in real time, being able to control and approve invoices in real time, has changed the way that tax administrations can enforce particularly indirect or consumption taxes around the world. And you know, with the developments, for instance, in Europe and other parts of the world around electronic invoicing, we can also, I think, safely state that the big wave of regulatory mandates in this area are still to come. That makes the work that Luisa already referred to of the ICC quite seminal in the sense that ICC saw this trend coming already 4 or 5 years ago and started the working group. And I will talk a little bit more about how that group has worked, because I believe that just the practice that is behind the principles and some of the other deliverables is almost as important as the deliverables themselves. First, though, let me talk a little bit from my practical experience as a business person, having helped businesses through my different ventures implement continuous transaction controls and electronic invoicing now for the past decades across many different countries. I lead a team within the company that I currently work for of about 100 people who are positioned around the world, who do nothing but monitor legislation. And the way they do that is when it comes to continuous transaction controls, at least as one area that we monitor, is that we have a questionnaire of more than 150 yes/no questions that just keeps growing with every new country that introduces these types of controls, in order to understand where on the spectrum a particular country falls in terms of its implementation of continuous transaction controls. Why do I mention that number? Is because the math gets really interesting if you look at these different categories. Every single country has a completely different subset of these questions that are answered yes. Now, if you take those and if you multiply each of those countries with their different profiles, if you multiply that with the number of systems and processes that any taxable person that has to work with more than one country's legislation has to connect to, you already get to you know, quite high variability. So larger companies that we work with, big multinational companies, might have up to hundreds of systems that need to, one way or the other, connect to these state systems that receive and approve invoices and other types of commercial documents in real time. Smaller companies may have only a handful, but typically it can be very, very complex to make sure that all of your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, and your accounting systems connect to these systems in the right way, with all of the 150 or so specific lines in the specification being met. And of course, what we should not forget is that those 150 lines or so per country's implementation of continuous transaction controls continuously changes as well. So the average rate of change is about 4 to 10 changes per country per regime. So if you then multiply that by the number of countries that some companies are active in, you get to very, very high numbers of permutations. Now, one might say that's a problem for multinationals, but actually the impact is disproportionate for SMEs. So we always talk about electronic commerce and how the internet has made the market access around the world for smaller companies a lot easier as well. Continuous transaction controls and this variability and these tens of thousands of permutations are actually making it really difficult again. So we are closing up the internet that we just invented to smaller companies that had just started using it as a byproduct of tax law. And the interesting thing about all of this, and this was the realization we had a couple of years ago, is actually there's no objective reason for any of this variability. It's really just we are not talking to each other. Right? There's no, or at least I have not yet to talk to anyone who has an objective reason for things being so wildly different from one country to the other. Now, an important background to this is the concept of a paradigm change, which I know is a largely overused term, but in the world of tax, particularly consumption taxes like VAT or goods and services tax or sales and use tax, the world has, of necessity, because of the means that we had at our disposal with paper-based communications, has been pretty slow moving. So periodic reporting has really been the tool of choice of necessity for most countries to receive enforcement information on how companies were basically helping tax administrations to collect these taxes. In the slow-moving world, policymaking, it's never been perfect, but it's okay for companies, taxable persons, and their associations like ICC and others to think about the policies and opine on what those policies, whether they can be improved or not, or provide information on the impact of those policies on their businesses. But in a world whereby colossal amounts of very, very large, extremely complex information systems between businesses and tax administrations need to exchange absolutely humongous amounts of data in real time, and it becomes like dependency for the clearance of this information to be performed before trade procedures and commercial processes can be performed. You create an incredible amount of dependency, and basically the policymaking paradigm that we've used so far, whereby these communities make their own rules or communicate through large position papers and legislation, basically doesn't work anymore. In a real-time economy, you need to have real-time communication between the taxable persons and the business community, the people who manage information systems, manage processes, are responsible for processes on both sides of the equation, need to have a much more fluid, real-time way of talking to each other. So Louisa already kindly talked about the ICC principles that we established, so I'm not going to go back to that, as a way of trying to create a little bit more of a common rule book for any country that wants to implement or evolve their continuous transaction controls, electronic invoicing rules. And of course, it's also incredibly important to know that, for instance, within the PEPPOL community, those have been adopted as the basis for the continuous transaction controls work that's been done too. These principles, by the way, have been referred to by countries like France, Saudi Arabia, and others that have started working on continuous transaction controls of different kinds as well. So in many ways, they've been rather successful. In many other ways, unfortunately, they have not always been implemented by every tax administration, in the sense that a lot of these principles are quite procedural, and we still feel that there is more that can be done on the part of public administrations when they introduce these kinds of controls in working with the private sector and making sure that these fairly simple principles can make life so much better for everyone. But what we also did in conjunction with these principles is take all of this one level deeper. And so there is a stock-taking report which has not been published to the market, but is available for countries that are implementing these controls. And I just want to really run through some of the practice areas that we've touched on in that, and then I will close. The practice areas that this stock-taking report, again, which is available for tax administrations that are considering continuous transaction controls or are considering changes to the way that they evolve them. There are different areas that are being addressed here, such as the use of data obtained by tax administrations. That goes into things like data privacy and confidentiality, which is a huge issue for businesses, obviously, for tax administrations and national economies as well. The exchange of data among tax administrations in a retention period. I'm not going to be able to get into every single one of the next slide here either, but you can see there's a tremendous amount of practice areas that we have documented, whereby we have documented both some of the problems that may occur in these different sub areas, as well as areas of practice that we have seen actually work, whereby the tax administration and businesses have been able to align on a good way of collaborating on a day-to-day basis around these topics. But the variability in the number of areas, of course, is being touched upon here, I think is, again, an important proof point to say this cannot be handled without a new policymaking paradigm. And this is precisely what we did in the ICC group with both tax administration representatives and business representatives coming around and talking about these areas and explaining to each other both why some of these things are really difficult to implement for businesses, but also important for tax administrations to provide specifications on. Data to be submitted to C2C platforms is obviously another important area that we've looked at. The process design of C2C platforms, again, there's a good number of specific topics that we've gone into. And there's another one here that I just wanted to briefly highlight in the yellow box here, because there's obviously a huge discussion ongoing, and this is why it's very timely and relevant that we have our colleagues from Open-PEPPOL here too, is that the C2C process design, as a lot of countries are evolving, their thinking is going more and more into the actual business process, the exchange process of data. Latin America was the first country to introduce continuous transaction controls and did not regulate, in many cases, the actual exchange of the data between suppliers and buyers. Now that this practice is spreading around the world, we are seeing that the actual invoice exchange is becoming part of the legislation. And there's really a massive amount of work that still needs to be done, and that we will be pursuing both in ICC and in other places on that part of the equation as the regulation starts to affect the actual interchange of the data as well. And it's important, I think, that we adopt new terminology here too. And we think beyond just things like the data format or the delivery mechanism, we need to think about networks and how we can actually use the standardization on the back of tax design to implement policies that are also good for economic growth and trade. I think I will leave it at that. That was just a quick introduction to some of the more practical work we've been done, and I want to provide a little bit of quantification around the size of the problem for businesses that need to implement this, and the importance of businesses and governments to work together on these very practical issues to get everything to work to the benefit of all.
Thank you very much, Christian. And it's very impressive work. And, you know, I work mostly on customs and trade, but each time I enter a bit the other spaces such as tax that are linked a lot with customs, of course, it makes me think that in customs, the authorities and also the private sector is a bit spoiled, because we have the World Customs Organization, of course, where they can exchange and talk to each other, and just when it's so important to have standardization and harmonization. So I think in the tax space, it's always a bit more difficult, because there's no real organization for tax authorities. So let's turn to our next speaker. I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Greg Smith. He will talk about PEPPOL and cross-border trade, and he is the government policy lead on e-invoicing at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment of New Zealand. So please, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Florence. Now I will have a crack at sharing my screen and see how I get on. Fingers crossed.
If you want, I can share, Greg.
Oh no, I think I'm there. Let's have a look. Oh, hang on. Okay. Right, can we see my screen?
Yes, it's working.
Excellent, excellent. Right. So what I'd like to talk about, so we've had some great discussions today about the theory, a lot of discussion about CDC, and what I'd like to do is sort of talk from a different perspective about, you know, from a government policymaker's perspective of why do we introduce e-invoicing? What are the what's the policy problem we're trying to solve, and particularly around the New Zealand government, how we're putting our we've put a lot of resource into implementing PEPPOL, and I want to talk a little bit about how we're putting our money where our mouth is, and really how we're supporting the principles of interoperability and you know, having regard to international standards in the development of e-invoicing systems. So taking New Zealand as an example, so when we do talk about the introduction of e-invoicing, really it boils down to two policy questions. Are you going to introduce it for business efficiency or for tax compliance? So we've talked a lot about CTC today, which is absolutely fascinating. But if we look at New Zealand as a state, well, you know, we are reliant on international trade. Without international trade, New Zealand would be depopulated very, very quickly. We have a highly deregulated economy, which is sort of a follow-on from our 1980s reforms. We're a highly tax compliant state. We're a nation of small and medium enterprises. In fact, the vast majority of our businesses have less than 20 staff working for them. New Zealand's a very easy place to do business in. Low barriers to entry, very easy to set up a business, low compliance costs. We enjoy a very close trading relationship with Australia. We in fact enjoy a single economic market with Australia. So it's sort of like a mini EU in the South Pacific. But having said all that, we've been unable to harness technological innovation to improve productivity across the economy. So we linger at the bottom of the OECD tables, and we have for a long time. So taking into account all these issues, clearly the CTC route isn't the right route for New Zealand at the moment. The business efficiency route is. So how do we address that? So when we look at adopting an e-invoicing solution, we're looking at digital inclusion. So it has to be easy access to all businesses and digital service provider. Considering that the vast majority of our businesses are small businesses, they have very limited resources. But we agreed very early on they must be aligned to universally acceptable digital service standards. Any solution we implemented had to be open and responsive to change and innovation. And, you know, it has to, and as one of the speakers said earlier, you know, we're working in or living in a dynamic environment. We have to be able to respond quickly to changes in the environment and to different drivers. And you know, any solution has to enable innovation in broader context. As Steve said previously, PEPPOL, for example, isn't just about e-invoicing. It's really, it is a foundation for the digital, you know, the secure transmission, receipt, and validation of business documents, whatever they might be. Goes without saying that a system must be trusted and secure, but really our overall commitment, even though we're looking at a domestic solution for e-invoicing, we had to deliver an integrated solution across multiple jurisdictions. And in fact, that really at the beginning means Australia, because as I say, we have an open market with Australia. So our policy response boiled down to these 4 areas, and I'm not really going to go through this because I think we already know this. Secure more open markets, improve productivity, enable faster payments, improve security. You know, you can add or subtract, but that's really the benefits of e-invoicing. So that's why we picked PEPPOL. PEPPOL we see as flexible, it's scalable, and it's future focused. So flexible in terms of in Europe, it was initially a business to government initiative for equity of access to government procurement in Europe. But we're adopting it primarily as a B2B small business initiative. PEPPOL is flexible enough to accommodate that. You know, we've segmented our domestic market into really 3 separate areas: large corporates, government, and small to medium enterprises. PEPPOL works for all of them. It is scalable. It is scalable. We have begun with e-invoicing because, you know, that is the most pressing need, and that is where there's the highest demand. But we do see that we will be delivering the whole procure to pay suite over time once we've embedded e-invoicing in New Zealand and in Australia. And it is future focused. As Steve said, we're already exploring areas like logistics. For me personally, I also see customs clearance there's huge potential there. But the point is that PEPPOL, the PEPPOL interoperability framework, can accommodate that. And really, we see PEPPOL as a foundation for the digitization of the trans-Tasman single economic market. So, you know, New Zealand and Australia have worked in lockstep in implementing PEPPOL. So, in Australia and New Zealand, we don't call it the PEPPOL interoperability framework. We call it the Trans-Tasman e-invoicing network. At this point, you know, we are quite focused on our domestic implementations, but clearly we can see that within the next 2 to 3 years, the flow of invoices, the flow of business documents across our border will increase dramatically. So from a strategic perspective, how's the New Zealand government putting its money where its mouth is? So in terms of our work with Open PEPPOL, you know, New Zealand has a very high level of participation with Open PEPPOL as an organisation. We've embedded ourselves in the governance of the organisation and also in the operational activities around the functioning of the organisation. We're very active in various working groups, and really our focus is continuing refinement, continuing improvement, and getting PEPPOL prepared for the future. But we also take a regional view. So again, we have a very close relationship with Australia as our sort of sister or brother PEPPOL authority, but we also have close links with Singapore and Japan, and hopefully with Malaysia coming on board. We have are going to have a very robust local PEPPOL community. So within our states, you know, the interoperability and adherence to common principles questions been solved really. In terms of working with the New Zealand government, I have quite a high engagement with our New Zealand procurement, the New Zealand government procurement team at the ministry that I work for. We have to be seen as the exemplars. So we're you know, investing a lot of resource in building capability within central government, central New Zealand government. But looking outwards, we have a lot of engagement in international trade and digital economy agreements in terms of embedding articles around the principles of openness, transparency, interoperability, and the adherence to common standards when developing domestic e-invoicing or e-procurement solutions. And we also have again a very an Indo-Pacific focus. So we're also doing a lot of work in APEC around e-invoicing, and we're going to be working with Australia on getting something into APEC in the next cycle. And again, in terms of New Zealand's work with Australia, we maintain a very strong relationship. We work with them weekly. Our PEPPOL authorities are completely aligned. So as the ministry I work for acts as the PEPPOL authority in New Zealand. and we participate and we facilitate co-host forums, webinars, and our communication strategies are quite aligned. But this shows the beauty of PEPPOL and interoperability, because quite frankly, New Zealand and Australia, even though we do have a single common market, if you like, they're really the characters of them are really quite different. So as I say, our government structures are quite different. They have a federal system. Our system in New Zealand is much simpler. The structure of their economy is quite different. They have many more big players than we do, but yet we're able to work quite closely together and are able to develop common policy positions on interoperability. And it's driven by the fact that we've adopted PEPPOL. So in terms of cross-border trade, we've been very active in the negotiation of the New Zealand, Chile, Singapore Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. That was the first one where we really nailed our colours to the mast and put some requirements around e-invoicing into that agreement. We also embedded the principles of interoperability and adherence to common standards in the New Zealand-UK Free Trade Agreement, the European Union Free Trade Agreement, and most recently, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. So there you have global plus an Indo-Pacific focus. And again, we're always looking to further develop our relationships with our PEPPOL community in the Indo-Pacific region, but also outside the PEPPOL community, because yes, we see PEPPOL as the perfect solution, but we also understand that from a strategic policy perspective, it is all about interoperability. It's all about openness. It's all about adherence to common standards. And of course, we see PEPPOL as satisfying all those requirements. And finally, one other very, very important piece of work we're working on jointly with our Australian and Singapore counterparts and other states around the world is agreeing a joint statement on e-invoicing in the World Trade Organization. And that's progressing really well, because I think there is general agreement in most states around these principles. It's just that they play out differently in different domestic economies. Right, I will leave it there, because I think our time is almost up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being so concise, and it's great to hear an example of how PEPPOL is implemented and what impact it can have, what positive impact. And so now let's turn to our next speaker. We will hear from Mr. Lefteris Leonteridis, who is Operation Manager at Open PEPPOL, and who will tell us a bit more about the PEPPOL interoperability framework. And he has actually led various PEPPOL projects.
Can I just jump in? Sorry.
Yes.
I'm afraid Lefteris isn't available today.
Oh, okay. I didn't see it actually. I didn't check the speakers in the Zoom.
Yeah,
so then you will
I'll
take over for him.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so then people know you already. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good. So conscious of time, so I'll try and get through this a little bit very quickly. Perhaps you could just expand there. Good. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to talk about the PEPPOL interoperability framework. So we've talked about sort of how it works, but underneath the covers, there's a bit more detail to be aware of. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but essentially we have in the PEPPOL interoperability framework, we have two major components. One is the governance framework, and then secondly, the architectural framework. So the governance framework is a set of agreements between the different actors in the PEPPOL environment. And the next slide will cover that in a bit more detail. But before we go there, in terms of the architectural framework, we have the PEPPOL specifications. And sorry, those specifications relate to the messages and to the PEPPOL network. And there was a question in the chat or the Q&A, and just to advise that the specifications are updated. We have a release cycle every I think it's March and October, so there's two releases every year on specifications, and they're updated as needed in response to requirements that are raised through the membership. But in terms of the governance arrangements, this diagram here sort of shows the relationships between the different actors that Andre talked about at the beginning. So we have Open-PEPPOL, its members, it's a member-owned organisation, so we have a General Assembly, one member, one vote in the General Assembly. That sets statutes and regulations for how Open-PEPPOL operates. And then Open-PEPPOL has a legal agreement with PEPPOL authorities, and the PEPPOL authorities have legal agreements with the PEPPOL service providers in their jurisdiction. And the service providers have commercial agreements. This is not regulated by PEPPOL, and those are in place between the service providers and the end users. So, so those agreements provide a legal structure and allow us to run the governance processes that are needed to underpin a global sort of approach such as Open-PEPPOL. So if we just run past that quickly to the next slide. So yeah, I just wanted to spend a little bit more time on the PEPPOL International Invoice. And what we started with in PEPPOL was what we call PEPPOL Biz Billing 3. So this, as well as the other document types, this refers to invoices and credit notes. And this is the mandatory specification for all invoices that are exchanged in the PEPPOL network. And the specification is compliant with the European norm, and this provides interoperability within Europe and supports, simply supports cross-border exchange in Europe. However, the challenge that we discovered once PEPPOL started to extend beyond Europe was that there were different sales tax arrangements. In Europe, it's all VAT, elsewhere it's not. So we had to create jurisdiction-specific versions of the PEPPOL invoice for use in Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand. More recently, we've come to Japan, and as a result of that, we took the opportunity to introduce a new version, which we call the PEPPOL International Invoice, and this avoids the need for jurisdiction versions to overcome this issue on tax. And this new approach on the PEPPOL International Invoice, which is called PINT, it's not PINT, it's PINT, and the PINT facilitates the interoperable exchange of e-invoices across the PEPPOL network at a global level. So if we go to the next slide, this PINT model, this has been recently updated and has been developed for Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore, and that's being tested in what we have a testing environment we call a playground, and that model, which will be interoperable on a global basis, starting in these jurisdictions, is currently being tested. In the meantime, we've created a PINT compliant invoice specification, and that's been approved for use in Japan. They recently announced that at the end of October, ministerial announcement, and that will become the invoice specification that's used in Japan. And to absolutely be certain that this will work on an interoperable basis across the world, irrespective of jurisdiction, we are running a proof of concept in the testing playground, and that will conclude before Christmas, and we'll be introducing the PINT as an option in starting in 2023 for any jurisdiction that needs to take it. And we will need to make a decision on the conditions under which we introduce that as the next generation of PEPPOL Biz. So ultimately we can see this international invoice replacing the previous PEPPOL Biz, and so there will need to be some kind of process for phasing out one and introducing the other, a period of running simultaneously. But eventually the PEPPOL International Invoice will become the sort of the standard approach within PEPPOL. So it's an important moment for us. It creates this global interoperability, and as that will then build into PEPPOL CTC and enable interoperability of CTC across jurisdictional borders. So it's quite an important moment for us, and it's good to see that Japan has sort of started that process. Just one more slide, very quickly. This last slide, it just sort of explains why PEPPOL, and it really confirms the things that we've already said. So I don't need to take too long on this, but perhaps the last bullet point is probably the one that's worth reinforcing, and that is the idea of connect once to reach all, and that's what we provide with the PEPPOL approach. So I'll stop there, conscious of time. We're overrun, so and there may be some questions that need to be taken.
Thank you very much. And it sounds like you have a lot of work ahead of you at PEPPOL. And so last but not least, you have Ms. Hanan Besha, who is a Senior Advisor for International Standards and Innovation. Her work is all about standardization for transport and logistics. So naturally, she works with a lot of the standards organizations, the development organizations, so UNESCAP, the Digital Container Shipping Association, ISO, IATA, and she's also UNESCAP Vice Chair for Transport and Logistics. And in her capacity at UNESCAP, she has also led one of the projects that many of you probably know, the Smart Container Project. So that was basically the first global standard for smart container data exchange. So many thanks for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Florence, for this nice introduction. Please share the slides. Okay, we see the slides. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning to all of you. Today I'll be presenting the UNESCAP standards relevant to this work. On the next slide, you will see a listing of our deliverables. Next slide, please.
And Wanarat, can you try to make it full screen, please? Maybe it's stuck. Today is not our day for Zoom, huh? But we will get there. We're all trying very hard. It happens sometimes.
Let me try to share myself.
Good.
Perfect. Yeah, we see them in full screen. Could we? Yeah, again, I will be presenting on behalf of UNESCAP relevant work to our webinar. Would you please move to the next slide, in which I have all the UNESCAP deliverables, different categories. The one before, right before. Perfect. Thanks. Thank you very much. So in terms of UNESCAP deliverables, we have international recommendations. We have agreed on business standards, common libraries, common directories, and code lists. Our core component library has been developed during the last 2 decades with more than 1,000 experts having a wide range of expertise and background under the United Nations umbrella. Basic semantic definitions, we have a mature, robust, and trusted, developed over 20 years, covers the entire international supply chain, all sectors and all the countries. And we have the basic technical specifications, so used by many organizations promoting interoperability. And we have more than 250 code lists used by UNESCAP, XML schema, and APIs. On this screen that you have seen earlier presented by my colleague Ian Watt, simply the message that UNESCAP has a multimodal global focus, non-competitive, inclusive by nature. You have free participation and free standards to use, developed in open public-private partnership. And we don't really look at one sectorial view. So we take a holistic view for all sectoral views. And we work on international supply chain, which is very, very complex, since we have multiple actors, multiple relations in data exchange. And the international supply chain requires this holistic view and approach. So it's very, very needed. Information will not be related purely to goods or purely to transport or purely to regulatory. We have really completing this links between the different sectors, and there are clear links between the information in each part of the global supply chain, multimodal, cross-industry, diversity view are really the key words here. Next slide, please. Thank you. The main message of this slide, basically, that UNESCAP data models recognize the crucial link between the sales contract and the transport contract. This is required for moving the goods, especially across borders. And the border controls require international supply chain, import, export, and in-transit borders. Louisa from ICC highlighted earlier the importance, and one of the benefits of the e-invoice is real-time tracking. And again, the view on having this link between the transport and the sales contract, very, very important. In addition to the smart containers deliverable, the track and trace newly published standards. So we have really a nice complete view, and we can get a link between the trade and the transport contracts, basically. Next slide, please. Thank you. The reference data family that I was mentioning earlier, the supply chain and MNT and cross borders are customized views of the by ship pay. So we really have our big dictionary, which is by ship pay reference data model. Then we restrict this huge subset to have a subset relevant to supply chain only, or to multi-modal transport only, or the cross-border management only. And having this link and being able to add and remove restrict data elements, that's how we ensure interoperability. So UNESCAP has developed a maximum data set invoice, which covers multiple sectors and multiple types of commodities, called a cross-industry invoice. It's unlikely that all the data in UNESCAP cross-industry invoice will be necessary all the time. So most usages will be a subset of the full cross-industry invoice. And by creating a standards model with all the potential information, it's easier for parties to identify any possible version of an invoice. So the whole idea, we restrict the data model we have to have exactly what we need. And our cross-industry invoice is really complete. That could be restricted as well to the minimum set that it's really needed. Next slide. This slide was developed by Trade Window that they shared, and basically they are stating that they are using the UNESCAP reference data model business standards for the cross-industry invoice, maritime e-bill of lading, preferential certificates of origin, and SPS certificates. So simply they are using this, restricting and customizing. The customization basically by restricting, picking the right and the minimum set of data that they need to meet their business requirements. Next slide. And I'm trying to be very, very concise, conscious of time as well. Here it's a list of standards. So we have e-business standards, the by ship pay reference data model that I did mention earlier, which has 3 different views focused on supply chain, MNT, or cross-border management view. And we have the business standards based on reference data models. So again, we restrict our data model to have different views. I would like to highlight the cross-industry supply chain track and trace that has been published a few weeks ago. The smart container giving us real time about the track and trace of the data that could be linked for the invoice to see really the progress of the data. During the COVID period, we did initiate UNTTC project, which was really focused on having, how to say that, paperless, not necessarily a document focused, but we really worked on all the data model enabling e-bill of lading, for example, which is a subset of that project. Data pipeline was as well briefly presented by my colleague Ian Watt, explaining the complexity and the data that involved in that work. Freshly completed, now we have JSON schema naming and design rules. We have an open API naming and design rules, which is basically enable us to publish our reference data model in a consumable way by our by the developers, and could be used to have all the subsets in form of API. So the UNESCAP semantic publications are available, as I stated earlier, for free. You can simply connect to that link and publish it. And the last slide, please. It's basically, again, the link so you can get all the UNESCAP recommendations, codes, and all the deliverables that I have mentioned earlier. I take this opportunity to express and thank all the experts involved in this work, and again invite new experts that would like to join. They are welcome to join, and again, a very open process, development work free of charge. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and for this insightful presentation. And since we have already run a bit over time, I would invite everyone to look at the answered part of the Q&A. And then Ian, I think you wanted to take one last question that hasn't been answered in writing.
I saw somebody ask who could answer the question about blockchain and paperless trade.
Yes, I asked.
Yeah, I messed up on trying to answer that. I'm not aware of it in the context of what we've been talking about today. If PEPPOL may have some answers there. There might be some activity going on between companies doing, just company to company kind of stuff, but I'm not aware of any in the kind of context of what we've discussed today. Does anybody else have another view?
Same for me, actually. I'm not aware of anything being done. There is some conversations happening in Europe around blockchain, but nothing tangible at this stage, as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Okay, well, then I would like to thank all our speakers for being with us today, for teaching us about what they're working on. And I will turn it over to Armin for the closing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like, first of all, to thank you all our participants. We have discussed so many topics, so many corners of the e-invoicing topics, looking to the international supply chain, standards developed by different organizations, non-profit organizations leading in Europe, the cross-border information exchange on e-invoicing, the partnership between public and private sectors on e-invoicing, cross-industry invoice. So there are so many components, so many, how to say, ingredients to this overall cross-border and national level partnership between public and sector, that I think our 30 minutes or 2 hours is not enough actually to put light enough on all the challenges and on all the benefits that these endeavors and efforts are going to bring from International Chamber of Commerce, from UNESCAP standards, from PEPPOL solutions provided across the borders and in Europe. So I think we can actually look to the questions that we have from the participants, and maybe we can have a follow-up kind of webinar on this. I would like also to excuse myself for any technical issues we found with our small investigation what was the issue. And I would like to thank all the speakers and participants for their time finding to join our webinar for these very interesting topics that we have been discussing. And I hope to see you next. We are planning our next webinar in January, maybe second half of the January, on the data analytics for the cross-border exchanges, for cross-border trade. Therefore, we hope to see you there, and thank you very much. I would like also to ask all the speakers if they can wait 2 minutes. Usually, traditionally, we have not done screenshot. I would like to have a screenshot so we can share also on our social media. Thank you very much for all participants. Now, I would like to ask our colleagues if the webinar is concluded and we can close the webinar. Thank you. Okay, we just for ourselves, I can mention, I'm very sorry for the glitches that happened. I mean, we found that actually some emails that were sent and CC my colleague, it was using somehow the Zoom non-reply email under my colleague email. So she didn't receive, and I didn't double check with her with all PPTs, because usually we are working very synchronized and efficiently. But this time we have these challenges. So all the speakers, if you are still available, we can take, if you can open your cameras, If everyone is there, we will take a screen and share later.
It's just, it's showing 47 participants still on the call, so I don't know if you can close the.
I think it's closed actually, but we can still see the numbers because I already.
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Okay, I just go ahead and have a click. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time having here. Usually it's very challenging with all the work body and workload going on. Everyone is involved in different projects, several projects, and having time to do this kind of sharing of knowledge is very important to share light on, shed light on different aspects of our work. Thank you very much and hope to see you for the next upcoming webinars. Possibly we can cooperate for other areas. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armin.
Thank you, Louisa.
It was good to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye for now.
Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. Bye.